Welcome to CISO's Insiders Podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Okay, good morning, Noah. It's nice to have you here on this episode of CISO's Insiders. So I believe you're the CISO of a company called Opendoor, and let me just share with you the little that I was able to gather online about you. So
Sure.
it seems that you started off in the Marine Corps as a non-commissioned officer. You spent a bunch of years there. Maybe you could share a bit about that. Upon your discharge, you continued to into the cyber world. I believe you started off as a pen tester for at least from what I remember, two different companies, two different large vendors. One is called Coalfire, which is a very big one now. I'm not sure if it was that big before.
Sure.
And that was and then you moved into a few other consulting positions. You held the role of a director and later on a VP of security engineering before landing your current role as the CISO of Opendoor. Maybe you could introduce yourself and provide some background about Opendoor as well, because I don't want to butcher anything here. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you nailed it. I found myself in my 20s as a kind of lost and directionless. Joined the Marine Corps, did some fun stuff there, and it was an experience for sure. Then got out and wanted a job where maybe there's a little more safety, relative safety, I guess, and got into penetration testing. Yeah, learned everything in my initial stuff at Coalfire. I was a pen tester, went from there to Active Labs, was a pen tester there. Did a lot of physical security, a lot of incident response, forensics, application security, full attack simulation, red teaming. Went from there to NCC Group, helped run that practice there, had a great time in NCC Group, then went from there to Datadog and built out our infrastructure security practice, and then transitioned to do our full-on security engineering practice where I had software development, application security, infrastructure security, everything kind of under one bundle. And then I decided I was going to take a break. So I was going to take 6 months off work. It turned out that didn't work out. It took more like 2.5 months off work. I gave my notice and I was off on leave and relaxing. And then I came across this kind of interesting position, started talking to Ian, the CTO at Opendoor. Turned out like the team seemed really great. The mission was awesome. I really liked Ian's approach in general, and then it just turned out to be a really good fit. So what Opendoor does is that the idea of Opendoor is that we're streamlining the whole home buying experience for individuals, right? For a lot of people, buying a home is your single greatest financial transaction. It's like the most money you ever spend on something, right? And it's scary and it's hard and it's a really old process that has a lot of moving parts and is very complicated and has a lot of potential to go wrong. And so what Opendoor does is create kind of a technology-enabled solution that makes it simple and easy and kind of engages with the user on where they are, right? On their phone, at their home. You can do a lot of it, almost everything now remotely, especially with the advent of COVID. It's really like the goal is to make kind of allow you to really be to live where you want to live and to kind of take control of your own kind of realty situation when you're buying and selling homes and to feel confident and safe when you do it, because it's really hard. I've bought and sold 2 homes now, and not with Opendoor, but I kind of wish they were there because it was pretty scary.
yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction. And usually at this stage, I like to ask a couple of icebreaker questions just to get our listeners to know you better. And, just feel completely at ease if you want to answer those or not. But typically I ask about your marital status and about your favorite drink.
Sure. marital status is I'm married. I have 3 children and a wonderful extended family that I feel community is super important. Been married to my wife, Jess, since 2009. So pretty long run. Definitely would not.
Same for me.
Yeah, awesome. I definitely would not be, I would have no measure of the success that I have in my life if it wasn't for a partner like Jess, for sure. And favorite drink, root beer is definitely way high on the list. I'm a really big into root beer. It's very delicious. I also enjoy normal beer, right? of all kinds. And then I think go-to right now, as bad as it is, I drink a lot of sugar-free Monster in my life right now. So, with 3 kids and a CISO job and a busy life, got to keep the chemical motivation going for sure.
Yeah, I try to avoid those. I used to drink.
I did too for a while.
Yeah, I used to drink Coke for a long time, but then it just I try to stick to water, and personally, I'm a single malt kind of guy. So, but
oh, cool, yeah. I also enjoy the single malt on occasion.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things was I had a situation as a consultant where I had a individual who was very adversarial to me being there, and he also was had very strong opinions about single malt in general. He was basically the defender and I was the attacker, and I was very young in my career and I had been successful. And so we sat down, at this dinner, and I intentionally ordered a single malt, very expensive single malt whiskey and Coke. I have since grown and am less spiteful in my life, I think. But
yeah, that sounds like blasphemy to me, but
yeah, it totally is.
Okay, let's get started. So I'm gonna ask you, a bunch of questions here that I usually ask. Feel free to, provide whatever answer that you feel is most suitable to you. What's the one thing you wish you'd known when you began your career?
Well, I think I'm gonna actually flip around and say that, I am very thankful that I knew very little, because I think something that was a boon to me was approaching every situation with really fresh eyes and no expectations. I feel like almost every time I've gone into a situation in my career with a very strong expectation of what is going to happen, I have been unpleasantly surprised and it's turned out badly. I feel like whenever I go in with no expectation, I'm just going to take it as it is, and I'm going to try to address a thing in its own right. I think things go off very well. I do think I wish I knew how really critical and important, or how much easier my life would be if I learned any amount of software dev first, because I didn't actually get, even be able to write code in any shape or form probably until I was, over 1.5 years, 2 years into my career. And I was able to muddle through. I was a little, I wouldn't say I was a script kiddie, but in my first year, I probably definitely was. And I think that if I, in the time when the 6 months when I was trying to get a job in security, if I would have known that I should be also learning to code during that period of time, I think that would have done me a lot better.
Yeah, especially back then, right? Because I think when I was involved heavily in application security, it probably was maybe 14, 15 years ago. And I think back then it was a real competitive edge if you had that. And, personally, I didn't code as well. I started off as a consultant, and then doing my bachelor degree, this was the first time I actually coded a bit, but it did provide a good background, I think. So I can understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I was spoiled a little bit in the beginning because 2011 was right kind of at Metasploit was at one of its really big peaks. There was a lot of really great tooling coming out in a variety of ways. MS the pass the hash stuff was still really easily exploitable. Most environments were very Windowsy at the time. So you were able to get through a lot with just knowing how to Windows administration, which I knew pretty well, and a little bit of PowerShell. as my career transitioned more towards like non-Windows stuff, the need to be able to write in things like Python or Go became much more prevalent, and Java for sure. Me and Java have a love-hate relationship. But yeah, for sure, I think that was the way to go. My competitive edge really came from, I basically just like told myself that everyone was smarter than me and everyone had more experience than me. So my plan was I was just going to go to sleep 2 hours after everybody else stopped working. So I basically just worked longer and tried to brute force my way through things, and it worked, but it was pretty painful for the first couple of years as I was learning. But as I got my skill set, the need for me to work till 2 a.m., 3 a.m. kind of started to diminish.
Yeah. And can you name like maybe, one big failure or maybe a few smaller ones and if you were able to take anything out of it, what did you learn from it?
Oh yeah, I have. I'll say a lot that I learn a lot on my face, right? By failing and falling straight on my face, right? I like learning on your face, right? My brother also says that if you don't pay for stupidity, you will keep buying, right? So these lessons from failure are very important.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the first big ones for me was in one of my very first reports I ever wrote for network pen testing, I conflated. I still didn't understand really the difference between a couple different SSL vaults, and I called out one that would have been very. I basically like confused two. One would have been incredibly bad with one that was just like a total low. And I put this like really flagrant critical in the report. And then we delivered it to somebody. It didn't get properly vetted, and then we delivered it to somebody who really cared. And they cast disparaging thoughts on my company, and said I was basically a waste of skin, essentially, in much more professional ways. And I got a lot of flack for it. But it really drove home how important that report and the deliverable is, and how important the quality actually is, because I hadn't been exposed to it very much at that point. And so that was that one. And then I think if you fast forward a little bit in my career, there was at least one time in maybe my like 4 or 5 years in where I had this idea that like I knew I knew what a pen test was going to look like before I even started doing the test. I knew based on their environment stack, the vulns I was going to find, how it was going to be, and it was going to be this way. And I basically cold shotted this really important pen test. And I showed up, and then it had all the stack I expected, but nothing worked the way it was supposed to work, because these people actually knew how to do their job. And I ended up looking like just a complete, dirtbag to my. I think I had to like basically eat my words, accept the crow, and then I took a minute, step back, reset myself to 0, went back into the same pen test, and was successful. But that's one of those things where I think if you walk in with assumptions, you're setting yourself up for failure, and that's has stuck with me for quite a while.
Yeah. And I think personally, been in the consultant world for probably 21 years now. I think the hubris that some people develop, I think that's the main reason to cause these kinds of failures. And I think humility is a great trait. I mean, and the more that you learn, the more that you understand like how much you're still missing, right?
Yeah, I'd say that I always tell myself every time that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And so I would push myself to try to be humble and defer to other people, and always ask for help, and have no ego. But when you have a bunch of success happen all like rapidly, you get this feeling that, oh, maybe it's maybe I'm just way better than I give myself credit for, and that imposter syndrome starts to fade in the background just a little bit. And then you get smacked in the face by a 2x4, right? So I think I've internalized that pretty well at this point in my career.
Yeah. I think it comes with age as well.
Sure.
And the maturity. Okay. And so
don't call me mature. Don't be a liar. I definitely know that.
So touching a bit about your failures, what would you say your biggest accomplishment were?
Well, there were a couple technical achievements that I was under NDA during, so I can't talk about them. But they were very, very difficult, and they required me to do things like write code from scratch in languages I'd never written in, and think about problems in very specific ways that went way outside the box of like normal linear pen testing thought, and into like when you're chaining a shell into some type of like when you're like I can't well just a lot of stuff, right? You're writing code to like trigger some little function that then gets you a reverse shell and then lets you do another thing that lets you inject all these many steps over the course of weeks. And those projects really stuck with me on like how like nothing is really like ever exactly as it seems, and all the best things are worth really hard work. Then going forward, I think the thing I'm actually my biggest successes have nothing to do with my technical success, though those things I think taught me a lot, is that my team, right? My teams. Anywhere I've been, the thing I pride myself most on is the team that I've contributed to and helped build. At AccuMalt Labs, I helped build a training program that got a lot of associate pen testers in, and then escalated. And a lot of those associate pen testers have now gone off to be very successful in their careers. And I feel like that's a good contribution to the community, and that makes me feel successful. At NCC Group, I did the same thing. I took a lot of people who are application pen testers who didn't really do infrastructure very much, or who were junior, and I integrated them into infrastructure pen testing against very application dev focused environments. So let's just be very successful, but also help those people ramp up their careers and grow their skill sets. And they've gone off now and been very successful. I went to Datadog and I built what has been a very successful, very healthy, happy team there. And those people are all doing very well in their careers and are happy and feel very engaged and have done really cool technical projects that have contributed back to their portfolios. And then I hope to do the same at Opendoor. So I think investing in your community around you, in my opinion, is the best thing you can ever do. And I think those are the greatest successes I've had for sure.
Yeah, but you can only do that if the culture in your company allows that, right? And it's.
I'm going to disagree.
Yeah.
I'm going to say you can build your own culture, right? But maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe some places are just so toxic that it doesn't work out. But I think you can. I think you can put a stake in the ground and say that this culture, whatever company we're at, is problematic. We're going to build a good culture and security, and then we're going to extend those tendrils of good culture and good support out. We're going to be an example to the organization, and we're going to spread through the org, right? I think security should be, in general, a center of excellence, both for function as well as technical skill set, right? We should be, because your security team is usually pretty small compared to the rest of the org, which means you can really be very effective, right? So like so if you can be super effective, then it shows like, okay, well, we can take some of these lessons and we can grow them out, right? I think it's, I don't know. I maybe I'm just an optimist, and you're probably much more realistic than I am about it. But I have this idea that like we can always make a difference. It's just how much pain we're willing to go through to do it.
Sure. I mean, that's interesting, and we could. I was just saying based on my experience, but
No,
I
yeah,
might be
for sure. I
mistaken
didn't
as well.
Hopefully that didn't come off as rude.
No, not at all. I mean, just feel free. If someone were to seek out a career similar to yours, what advice would you give them?
Go learn to code first. I think is the first one. And the second one is, I think, I spent a lot of time getting told that things weren't possible and that I didn't understand how things worked. And then I went and got it to work the way that I needed it to work to achieve my goals. I think my biggest thing is that everyone who gives you advice is giving you advice on their personal experience, and you should totally take it and internalize it and listen to it and process it. But you have to make decisions to discount advice sometimes and blaze your own path. Sometimes you're going to do that, and like I said, you're going to learn it on your face, and it's going to turn out you were wrong and the advice you got was right. And then sometimes you're going to turn out that you were right, and you're going to be better off for the experience that you go through. Mm-hmm. And I think that's super important. I think a lot of people are either afraid, they're they don't take other people's advice at all, or they're afraid to not listen to the advice they give it. And so I think there's a middle ground that we have to strike to be highly successful. And I think that striking that middle ground is what has made me successful in my career.
Mhm. Okay. What do you feel about the role of a CISO that's actually a part of the IT organization? If you could talk about the pros and cons.
What do you mean?
So, a CISO could report directly to the leadership. It could, or it could be a part of the IT organization and then report to the CIO or CTO. Do you have any thoughts about like the differences between the two approaches?
Yeah, I'm of the personal opinion that in general, I think CISOs can be most effective if they're reporting to either a CTO founder, right? Somebody who has a very strong foundational impact in the organization,
Mhm.
or they themselves are essentially like at a tier level, C-level to the CTO or CFO, et cetera, right?
Mhm.
I think those are the best. I think that there are other ways that can be functional. Ultimately, where CISO fits in, I think, is really dependent on the company, right? It's got to fit in such a way, like at engineering organizations, the thing I said is probably more right. At some more like banking or other kind of maybe financial organizations, it might look a little different. I think though the thing you want to avoid is there being a lot of filters between the expertise and the advocacy coming from your CISO and the people who actually sign the check or make the decision or accept risk for the org. You want to remove as many barriers between the communication as possible.
Mhm. Okay. Can you name a few resources that have helped you along the way?
Well, early on, they were things like Colonel Onage's blog, which is like Colonel Onage is like it was all hacking walkthroughs early on, right? And I know that he's gone off and done a bunch of other engineering stuff, and I'm sure he's got much more robust content. But there's a bunch of those people early on who were writing a bunch of like the initial hacking blogs, right? Rob Fuller, just Bravo Hacks, Pure Hate, just all these people that were, include cool hacker sign here, Kali Linux, right? Like the whole like OffSec stuff around that, and that whole community was super helpful early on. I think as I grew and moved into other parts of my career, the things that were much more or really impactful to me were more things like I've watched a lot of masterclass. I've read a lot of things about like leading in difficult situations and about just people's really like robust life experience. And I think those things add a lot, right? Like things like autobiographies and that kind of stuff.
So it sounds to me like you're, similarly to many others, you're a self-learner. So you used a lot of time and resources to learn online by yourself. But can you name like a few people that you would consider as mentors or, just...
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple. So at my very first job, I met a gentleman named Sean Malone. He was definitely my very first security mentor. Also at the same time, and he's now picking up, I think, his own security leadership role at the company he's at currently. And so he's a great dude. He really helped me. He was always this weird middle ground between very buttoned up and also like incredibly good pen tester, which I always think of like a, when we're like dirty hacker when you think pen testers, right? But he was always like, very well put together, very business savvy, but incredibly technical. And so from there, a gentleman named Mark Rogers, who's instrumental in me moving forward in my career at all. His face shows up on the news occasionally, and he's a dear friend and just a really great mentor for sure. And then there's a couple others: Andrew Becker, current CISO at Iterable, Dave Goldsmith, the CTO at NCC Group, or CISO, sorry, not CTO. Ha, or maybe he's more. I think he is the CTO actually. I think I got his title wrong. But Dave Goldsmith, great dude. Just The number of people I think is very large because I feel like I'm of the opinion that the more you invest in others and the more you're willing to be invested in, the more help you ask for, the more you're open to hearing other people, the better things get. And so I've just got a ton of people, I think, in my life who have been massive contributors. Martin Boss from Trusted Sec, Eric Milam, he jumps around a lot, but all people who taught me a lot growing up is in the pen testing community. John Ventura, one of my staff engineers at Datadog, who was also my first manager at Accuvant. So yeah, I mean, a lot. There's a lot of them. Kara Marie, who worked for me at Datadog, was also one of the people who taught me really the fundamentals of security research at NCC Group. She's a great security researcher and offensive security professional. Yeah, just a lot of people for sure. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was a long list, but I feel like it's not. I feel like I could go on for hours.
Yeah, and actually, this brings me to my next question, and you might have touched on that as well already. My next question is, what other CISOs do you look up to? And I think you did mention a few names.
I said a little bit, yeah. So Andrew Becker for sure. He's a good friend, and also he's been there with me, teaching me stuff along the way for quite a long time. Mark has gone back and forth between the CISO role and other roles and advisory. So I definitely include Mark Rogers in that as well. And then, I'd say there are quite a lot of other CISOs that are doing really great jobs. There's also some like CEOs and CTOs that I think, like I said, Dave Goldsmith, but also Joel Wallenstrom. These are people who, the way they approach things, he's at Wicker, right? And so the way they approach things are, I think, really impactful and instrumental with the way that we think, that I would like to think about both doing business and security.
Yeah, great stuff, and I'm sure they will appreciate the kind words. What's the one common myth about your profession that you want to debunk?
I think well, I mean, there's one that I think is starting to go away, and I'd like to say, we can debunk it, but I think it's already getting debunked. But is that for a long time, I think the role of CISO was seen as surprisingly non-technical, right? It was legal and paperwork and risk, right? And I think that's true today. But I think as in the modern kind of like software development organization, you also have to be able to have those deeply technical conversations with your team and also with your engineering partners, and be able to be in the room and not just have your eyes gloss over as they're talking about the tech stack they're working on. And I think that's been a push.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point. And let me ask you a follow-up question, if I may. Sure. Because if you're a CISO for a very large enterprise, let's say, I mean, you have directors that are subordinates to you, and they might be technical because at some point, personally, I think, and I might be wrong here, you might not be able to hold all those capabilities and be able to be business savvy and be technical and know about code and know about infrastructure, know about Kubernetes and whatever the domain of expertise might be. I mean, you can't possibly know it all, right?
Yeah, it's true. You can't know it all. I think you have to be willing to say when you don't know things, but you also have to be willing to put in the time, in my opinion, to do the pre-reading and research. And you should have the technical fundamentals, right? I'd say in the vein of CISO that I'm in, right, where I'm primarily focused on software engineering organizations. If you're a bank or something else, it's probably a completely different story, right? Like there's much more in the legal area, those kind of things that you probably don't need to be technical at all. But I think that if I know I'm going to go sit down with an infrastructure engineer and talk about the security risks of potentially adopting a new technology around Kubernetes, right? And I go into this conversation and I'm just asking questions and don't understand the fundamentals of the technologies we're working with, right? On a way that I can then kind of start really picking apart questions and really trying to understand what the risk is. I think I'm going to be entirely dependent on my directors and ICs for any feedback, right? I think though that puts a lot of weight on our directors and ICs to the terms of sometimes they need some space and time to go be doing more actually executing. And so I think the more that a CISO can be a design partner or can have an opinion in a complex engineering conversation is the more time you open up for your ICs to go really pursue that technical excellence and push those things. So you're right. I mean, eventually I think it gets away from you, but I think you can hold on to it, and at least you can stay, I think, savvy enough and associated enough that you can have the conversation without being totally left in the loop. While you don't necessarily have to be a specialist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. And this might, I mean, you might have touched on this with this last answer about my next question. But maybe you could give your take about the main concerns that CISOs nowadays have.
Yeah, I mean, so I think if I can drill down, I think I've alluded to this a lot, but I think there's a lot of different types of CISOs, right? There's ones that are more like, they're private, they're, federal investigators who became, or lawyers who then got into technology and security and are now more operating in terms of like, pure risk, legal, loss prevention, all those kind of things. And then there's people like me who have a technical background, who've gone through like software engineering and focus on software engineering companies. I'm not a software engineer, but I've spent a lot of time around it, right? And I think the things that are concerns for me and for CISOs in the area, right, are vendor risk. I think is always going to be a problem and a concern, especially as the vendors become more and more providing like critical infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have AWS and stuff now, but now you have like things like Snowflake, which is amazing, but you're now like having all your data warehousing is just living outside of your bounds of control, right? So there's a variety of those kind of things that are becoming more and more prevalent. So the vendor risk is becoming less and less about like, I have risk and I've offloaded a little vendor risk to this vendor, but to the fact that like a vendor may represent like, a very large majority of the risk to the organization, period. And they happen to be over here in a black box. And so you have to do your best to understand those things. So vendor risk for sure. And then I think team health, right? The way the team integrates with the organization and the way the team both appears to the organization and also feels internally about how they're doing and feeling engaged and supported.
Yeah.
I think those are the thing on the CISO's mind right now. Those are very important. There's a lot of other stuff, obviously, but. Definitely.
And, personally, I think vendor risk, it's actually easier to handle because you have compliance that you can employ to mitigate some of that risk. But team health, that's different. This is like something that you need to build. It's a culture, and you need to maintain it, and you need to put a lot of effort into it, basically.
For sure, absolutely. It's definitely, I think, it's P0 for me because I think everything else comes after that.
Yeah. Okay. Now, a quick question about how you could potentially help me. If you could step into my shoes as the CEO, do you have like any, and it doesn't have to be specifically about me, obviously, if you could put yourself instead of a vendor, is there any question that you feel that you would ask yourself, or anything that you would avoid doing when engaging with a prospect?
I think it goes back to the thing I said, like, don't make assumptions, right? Don't assume they're going to have time to talk, and don't assume that they're even going to respond, right? I am notoriously bad. I don't respond to vendors basically at all until I have a need, or it's like it's on my roadmap. And then what I do is I take all of the emails and content I've read and things of the vendors, and I go back and then I reach out and I start figuring out what's what and what's quality. I think any assumption like that, getting someone just like throwing a invite on my calendar that I've never met or talked to from an external company, those kind of things, those kind of assumptive behaviors, I think are like the most painful or detrimental to a relationship.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think I'm the same. I get tons of LinkedIn requests and a lot of meeting invites and stuff like that, and I never respond. But then if I do need something, I would go back to my LinkedIn messages and I would look for something there. And then you ask yourself the question, okay, but I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't if I hadn't received this at some point in time, right?
For sure.
So that, and I think that gets tricky because on one hand you don't want the noise that you get right now, but on the other hand, if you don't get it, you won't be able to go back and look for it, right? So I think for me, maybe if a vendor is able to stand out in the crowd, so when the time is right, you can reach out to him. But that's just for me, right?
I agree. I think you're totally right. I think the thing I don't like though is when like I'll get an email from a vendor and it'll say like, hey, I've sent you 3 emails and you haven't responded yet. Right. Like
Yeah.
that's not a way to, that's not going to prompt me to respond. Right.
Mhm.
But sending me one really good quality put together email and is leaving it at that and understanding that I will get back to you, I think is important. Though I did get one time that was really awesome. I had a vendor who I didn't end up doing any work with, but she sent me a video about persistence because I had a tagline at the time that was like talking about how important persistence and not giving up and stuff was important to me. And she had watched all my like talks and stuff I'd done and like quoted to me and like had this whole spiel about her level of persistence and her journey and then her product. And it prompted me to get on a phone call with her, right? And to like talk and really to learn about and really explore whether or not I wanted to work with that vendor. So there's definitely something to said about like going above and beyond, but I think like there's a very thin line to walk.
Yeah, because she put her time and effort into really properly like conducting a real research about you, right? And I think that's what prompted you to reach out. Okay, that's fair. Are there any types of self pitches that you think? I mean, and I think you just alluded to that, right? But any other pitches vendors should avoid, in your opinion?
I just think anytime where you're either casting dispersions or defaming anybody else, like saying negative things in general, and then also I think making assumptions about time and people's interest, as well as like what I and then maybe I'm this. I just have a really big problem with cold calls. I try to be gentle about it now. I was at one point less gentle. I try to be gentle about it in terms of I get a cold call, I let them know I don't take cold call. However, they're welcome to send me an email with their contact and I'll reach out to them. But the other thing is, I think one thing that the flip side is I'm always totally open to meeting up in person, having a coffee or a drink or a conversation if we're both at a shared locale, like a conference or something, and not with anyone having to buy me anything or anything like that. Just like if you want to get together and have an honest human to human conversation about your product and things going on, I would much rather that than a phone call or anything.
Yeah.
Obviously, time is finite though, but.
Yeah, of course. And I'm also a believer in personal relationships, so I can relate to that. And that's actually, that's a great answer. I don't think I've had that before on my next question on how can vendors connect to you in a non-intrusive manner. So I'm just assuming that, an in-person at a conference type of coffee or anything informal like that, just having a one-on-one discussion, an eye-level discussion. I'm assuming that's the best way, right?
That is the answer, yeah. Okay. So if there's a conference coming up, say RSA, obviously right now we're not doing conferences right now, but let's say RSA, DEF CON, Black Hat becomes a thing again. Send me an email, say, hey, I'm going to be here. We're going to be doing a thing, or it doesn't need to be a party invite or anything crazy. Just, hey, I'm going to be in town at these times. I'd like to talk to you about a product. If you have time, would you like to grab a cup of coffee? Right. Great. Yeah, let's do it. If I have time, I will totally do it. I usually have busy schedules during those conferences, but I totally will. I think that is the least intrusive way, the highest likelihood for me to get back to you. And then I do have a couple biases, right? I guess I'll tip this as I think I have a really hard time saying refusing to interact with someone who is either brand new and is just trying to prove themselves in their first go, because I'm a big fan of the underdog, and also vets. So if you're a brand new vet and it's your first sales job and you're worried you're going to make your quota, totally hit me up. I will definitely chat. I can't guarantee I'll buy anything, but we will have a conversation.
Okay, no, that's great advice, especially for the appropriate vendors. Okay, new vendors who are also vets. Nice.
I mean, that's a little bit of a joke, but more it's just in general, it's people who are just starting out in their careers. I will always take much more time for people who are junior in their career than the people who are veteran, because the junior people just need that investment more than the veteran people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's admirable that you're willing to mentor, partially mentor them. I try
to. It's something I think we all have to give back.
Okay. So what's the best way for our listeners to connect to you online?
I mean, so I don't maintain much of an online interactive presence. All my hobbies and things I do involve either my family or I have some personal hobbies that don't involve computers at all. So the best way is I'm on Twitter at Domo Do Good. You can search me up, Noah Beddome. So I'm on Twitter. Any basic OSINT will probably find you my email addresses. So feel free to spin up the Social Engineers Toolkit and go find those. And then other than that, conferences are good. I'm on Instagram, but mostly I just post a bunch of stuff about model painting. so the best one is probably Twitter. That's kind of I reserve for more like professional technical interaction and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And LinkedIn. LinkedIn's great. You can hit me
Yeah.
up on LinkedIn for sure.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question here. Okay, great. Okay, before we wrap this up, let's just ask. Just gonna ask you a couple of last questions here. If you had unlimited funds, what would you do with your life?
Nothing involving security whatsoever. I love security, but security keeps me the reason I'm in security is not because I am specifically passionate about security on like some like fanatical level. It's just that it's a job that is always interesting, exposes me to great people. It means something, it's meaningful. So I like doing it. If I had infinite funds, I would probably spend a majority of my time either like running some type of community centric organization like a community center or something where we could do like like a hacker space or a gaming space, or I would spend my time with my family or in the woods. Really, on a beach is a nice place too, right?
Okay, yeah, sounds about right. And one final question: have you read or listened to anything lately that have inspired you and you'd like to share?
Read or listened to anything that really inspired me. I have been seeing that Elon Musk quote along right now. I won't say it because it involves swearing, but there's that one that's like, optimism, pessimism. We're just going to get it done. I don't really listen to Elon Musk, but I see that quote occasionally, and it's been pretty emboldening to me, especially being a new CISO at an organization, like figuring out the work that needs to get done. And then honestly, like the things that I've actually like, this is going to sound pretty cliche, but actually listening to my kids. So like I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old and an 18-year-old. And if you ever want to have pure, unadulterated honesty, talk to an 18, 7-year-old or 5-year-old girl, and they will tell you exactly how it is. And so there's been a lot of like, working with them on different things and then like, learning stuff. School, but also like them commenting, like overhearing me on a call and then them making a comment to me afterwards, like, Dad, you were a jerk. Like, oh yeah, maybe I was, right? And then so I mean, that's really, I know that's not probably the same answer, but I'd say listen to those around you, especially the people who you think opinions might not be hyper relevant because they're probably going to see something you don't see.
Yeah, and I have to agree. I mean, it's amazing, like the number of times I heard like specific comments from my kids and and like was able to ingest them and just think about them and reflect. That's amazing. And I think my daughter, she asked me a few weeks ago, what's a black box and what's a gray box and what's the difference between them? But because she overheard me as well. But anyway, I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
I can't thank you enough for taking the time to jump on this quick podcast with me. And I think we got some great answers here, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some great insights to our listeners. And let me just thank you again for taking the time and joining this podcast.
Of course. Hey, thank you so much for having me. We really appreciate it. Yeah, this was great. I think there needs to be more stuff like this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.